So hello and welcome everyone to our webinar, which is called How Can We Make Social Care Reform Happen? Thank you for joining us today. My name is Catherine King. I'm the Marketing Manager at Policy Press, and I'm delighted to introduce this webinar in our series on participatory social policy. Social care should enable everyone to live full lives, with service users leading the change. Today, our panel of experts will discuss how to reform the social care system, covering issues such as service user involvement, choice and control in social care, the human rights of disabled people, and the neglect of service users in these conversations. Before I hand over to Peter, here are some housekeeping items. Please type your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Peter will put them to the panelists at the end of the session. Attendees, all of you can order copies of Richard's, Sally's and all Peter's books, which are published by Policy Press, at 50% discount until the 4th of June. Please use the code REFORM50 at the checkout. We will share links to these books during the event. A recording of the webinar will be available after the event and it will be sent to you in an email. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat also at the bottom of your screen. We have used closed captions enabled on this webinar. There's a button at the bottom of your screen, CC Live Transcript. Please use this to show or hide text as you prefer. I will now hand over to Peter to introduce the speakers.
Thanks very much, Catherine. And first of all, a big hello to everybody. It's terrific to be here. I'm Peter Beresford, and I'm chairing the webinar, as you know. I'm co-chair of the Disabled People Service Users Organisation, user-led organisation, Shaping Our Lives, and visiting professor at the University of East Anglia, and a long-term user of mental health services. And we're really pleased to be undertaking this webinar in association with Policy Press. It's the first webinar in a second series concerned with developing more participatory, inclusive and sustainable public or social policy. Our emphasis is very much on how those at the heart of such policy, as service users, carers and practitioners, but particularly perhaps service users, can have a real say in shaping those policies, practices, and what of course happens to them. And today, as you've heard, we're focusing on social care, which feels like the policy often that politicians want to forget. Certainly they seem to do their best to overlook and ignore it, it seems. Our present government has made a habit of that over the last parliament, repeatedly promising reform and never quite getting round to it. But we're getting round to it today. We want to explore how this critical policy for millions of people can be taken out of the neglect, denial, history, crisis and damage associated with it and become a key element in a new future that respects the rights and interests of the growing number of people it affects and who are currently so often let down to that. And to do that, we've got an absolutely brilliant panel of many talents and perspectives, and I'll introduce each of them as they come to speak. And much lived experience. The plan is that each person will speak for about 5 minutes. I'll let people know when they've had 4, and then most of our time hopefully can be spent in question and answer, where everyone will have the chance to put a comment or question for them to discuss. We'll be doing our best with that. And then we'll have some brief closing comments from our panelists and finish sharp at 1:15. I hope that's clear. We've got a running order for our panelists. So I'm going to turn now with many thanks to the panel, introduce them briefly, and then after they've had a chance to contribute, and finally they will also have a summing up opportunity, it will be over to you. So the first of our speakers I'm pleased to welcome is Donald O'Neill, who's been an adult social care service user for over 35 years. He's the author of the Lack of Care Act, 2014, Service Users' Perspectives of a Failing Adult Social Care System. Don, over to you and thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Yeah, I've lost faith with the nicely approach to social care reform. We've had buzzwords and expressions such as co-production, working in partnership. We've been doing various versions of that over the past 20 years, but there's been little progress in social change, in social care change. There's not been enough change. I have a friend whose care package is based around her staying at home the whole time. Someone pops in the morning, to give a breakfast and pops in at lunch to do a lunch. And someone pops in the afternoon to help to the toilet. And someone comes in for half an hour in the evening to heat up a meal in the microwave. And then they shout at her and tell her to eat this piping hot meal quickly, because they've only got half an hour for her to eat and put her to bed. This type of care package is from the 1970s. It doesn't allow her to live and play a part in the community. And that type of care package is not untypical for many social care users. They get to exist, but not live. I think user groups have been fighting hard for decades to get the change that's needed, and they've been pretty well ignored. Social care is still in a very bad way. So how are we going to get social care reform? I think the way forward is to enlist famous people. I think famous user groups need to link up with famous people with a personal connection with social care and get them to publicize it on social media and embarrass the government. I know this sounds simplistic. Let's look at some recent examples of change. Last year, I think it was, there was a campaign for free school meals. The government said, no, no, no. And then Marcus Rashford, the football player from Manchester United, got involved on social media. And the government said, yes, yes, yes. So after that invention by Marcus Rashford, the government announced that it would allow, I think about 1 million children more free school meals. And that was going to cost £120 billion. That's just from one famous person. If you look at the Brexit campaign, both sides employed famous people. Roger Daltrey, Michael Caine, Liz Hurley, J.K. Rowling. There are names, so many more names there. I mean, it sounds idiotic relying on famous people to get social care reform. But unfortunately, this is the way our society works. Once there's a critical mass of support, or the government feel there's a critical mass of support, they get embarrassed, they get scared, and they change their mind. I was in a Zoom meeting just last week, and the chair of a national NGO said the same thing. She was saying that getting public support could act as a significant catalyst to change. She thought it was a very good tactic to get social care change. So user groups need to link up with that famous footballer, actor, I don't know, someone off Strictly or Bake Off or any other show you can think of on TV, and find someone who's genuinely identifies with the campaign and get them on board. And I feel now it's quite a good time to do it before the next general election. Both Labour and the Tories have offered nothing when it comes to improving adult social care. Thousands of people have been forced further into poverty because they cannot afford their care charges and being forced into more debt. It sounds inane, get famous people on board, but it works. That's the way our society works. And I think this is how user groups maybe ought to function in the future. Get famous people on board. We've tried co-production, we've tried working in partnership, we've tried other buzzwords methods, and they just have not worked. We need to modernize our tactics for the world we live in today. Enroll the rich, get them on board. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Don. I'm really sad that Marcus is already taken, because I have to tell you that both as a footballer and for the other things he does, and his respect for so many people, he's one of my little heroes. And I think it's important that you set us off going by thinking about the how, not just what should happen, but how's it going to happen. And that leads us on to Richard Humphries, author of Ending the Social Care Crisis, which has been published by Policy Press and we know is available at a discount day, Senior Policy Advisor to the Health Foundation and Visiting Professor at the University of Worcester. Over to you for another perspective, Richard.
You're muted, Richard, sorry.
Forget to unmute. Apologies, senior moment, I suspect. Yeah, so really glad to be joining you, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to what I hope will be a really good debate. This is a really timely topic, isn't it? How can we get social care reform moving? Because at the moment, the current government seems to be going backwards. And it's a reminder that the coalition government back in 2011 accepted the Dilnot Commission proposals, albeit not as generous a version. It was then postponed and then scrapped altogether by the Conservatives in 2015. The proposals were resurrected later, but postponed again. And the very limited measures in the 2021 white paper, People at the Heart of Care, have since been rowed back on by the government. So I describe really the last 8 years as homeopathic policymaking in social care. That's to say, diluting proposals which in themselves were watered down versions of earlier plans. And homeopathic to the point there's very little left of the original package. And that, of course, is just the recent history. And it goes back much further. I think we've seen a quarter of a century of top-down, Westminster-driven policymaking that has failed to deliver large-scale reforms to how social care is organised, funded and delivered. And just to spell it out, that's 3 governments, 7 prime ministers, 13 secretaries of state, 16 ministers for care services over those 25 years, and enough reviews, commissions, white papers, green papers, and so on to stock a small library or even a moderate-sized library. And still we struggle with this question. And one of the reasons I wrote my book was that the frustration that arose from our apparent inability to learn from this experience of policymaking failure, or indeed to learn from how other countries have done it. And it reminds me of something that one of my favorite comedians, the late Peter Cook, said when he said that I have learned from my mistakes and I'm sure I can repeat them exactly. And that's what we seem to be doing, just repeating the same mistakes. So in my book, I argue that actually in learning from the mistakes of the past and how other countries have gone about this, we need to adopt a fundamentally different approach, both to secure political traction and public support for change. And that would involve replacing that traditional top-down Westminster, Whitehall-driven policymaking with a different process, using co-production, deliberative democracy to engage with the public about the issues, consensus building across the political parties, and drawing on some new thinking about long-term policymaking, the importance of a long-term approach to this, as opposed to the short-term initiativitis that we've seen too much of in recent years, throwing relatively small sums of money and expecting too much too quickly. And I echo the arguments of the American political writer Joseph Overton, who argued back in the 60s that the goal of reformers should not be to lobby politicians to support unpopular or unfamiliar policies, but actually to convince voters that investing in good social care, like universal health care, has great benefits for people and society. And thanks to the success story of our longer lives and medical advances, most of us will have some kind of care and support need at some point in our lives. 1 in 7 of us will need at least £100 worth of care. And it's getting social care into that place in the public imagination and public perceptions that this is something that's really, really important, is central to a fundamentally different approach. And part of that new approach is recognizing that reform will not work without the active engagement of people with lived experience, who should very much be driving the changes. And I think there are 3 things we ought to be looking for as a result of this new approach. A new social contract for care, whereby we have a new set of expectations about roles and responsibilities of individuals, communities, as well as government. Secondly, a different model of design and delivery with a decisive shift of rights and resources towards individuals with care and support needs. And thirdly, a new funding settlement that positions social care as a major and a universal public service in its own right, on a par with other major services such as education and healthcare. I think that's about my 5 minutes, Peter, so I'll stop there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. That's a very radical agenda, I think. And the only question I would have is how our policymakers, as they now are, would respond to it. But there's a lot there for us to take on board, I think, helpfully. We now move on to our third contributor, the secret welfare rights worker, who has needed to be anonymous, I think, because of her particular role, who works with older and disabled people to help them access welfare benefits and challenge discriminatory decision-making, committed to making the connections for independent living between social care and income maintenance. Over to the secret welfare rights worker, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have a long-term background as a social worker, in fact, in the context of palliative care. And this meant that I've worked with a very diverse population, including adults, children, young people, groups affected by many forms of exclusion and disempowerment in the context of end-of-life care in the community as well as in a hospice. But more recently, I've also been working as a welfare rights worker, and it's that experience I particularly want to draw on through the lens, of course, of someone with long-term experience in the social care system, and through that lens. So I don't think we can usefully discuss the future of social care in isolation, and we need to think about other policies across the board when we do that, from housing and planning to education and employment. But most directly and most important at the moment, I would say we must think of it in the context of social security policy. In other words, welfare benefits policy. And if we don't, we'll only be able to address and sort out one part of the story, leaving out a crucial other dimension. And if we don't address that, we'll fail to see how appallingly antagonistic to any just and responsible, inclusive and accessible social care system the current benefit system is. And this is critically because if social care is essentially meant, and I'm not saying it actually does, but it's meant to protect the rights and enable older and disabled people to live their lives as fully as possible, the welfare benefit system has been constructed for decades now, and certainly, I think, particularly in the last 13 years, to do the complete opposite. That is, on making people's lives as insecure, as unpleasant, as demeaning as possible. And that applies particularly, in my view, to the way they treat social care service users, older neuro, diverse and disabled people, mental health service users, and people with learning difficulties. So the charge sheet is a long one. There's a disproportionately high rate of benefits that are awarded on appeal, which highlights the arbitrariness of rejection processes for claims and the regularity, I would argue, of rejection of claims, particularly for benefits like personal independence payment. The explicit coupling of claimants with fraud by the Department for Work and Pensions, despite the actual official very low rates of fraud. The evidenced high rate of suicide, attempted suicide and death associated with the inequity of the process, and the inaccessibility, long delays and complete inefficiency of the system and the DWP. The truth is, it's as though the DWP and the Benefits Agency refuses to believe that there can be so many eligible claimants, despite our knowledge that this was predicted with demographic change. I think that the key point is the benefit system is still based on sort of poor law principles of deterrence and how inferior you are in life if you need benefit support. So I'd argue the key reform that's needed is a system that's disassociated from really populist and divisive politics against vulnerable groups, based instead on a model of independent living as developed by disabled people. where instead of having to prove what you can't do, benefits are awarded to enable people to do as much as they possibly can to be able to live on equal terms as non-disabled people. And that, I would argue, is what the role of benefits should be.
I'm assuming you're stopping there, secret welfare rights worker. Thank you for that. And it's making a very clear coupling that we cannot treat social care in isolation. So often the conversation is about connecting health and social care, which we know is an unresolved problem, but this is another key policy being brought into the arena, for which many thanks. We need to move next on to Sally Witcher. And Sally is the author of Inclusive Equality. She's a freelance consultant and a disabled person at high clinical risk from COVID, involved in developing and implementing participatory approaches to policymaking and in social care support developments and research. So over to you, Sally, and thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to try and rattle through this. Wish me luck. I'm going to talk a bit about learning in Scotland, because as people have been talking just now, I'm repeatedly struck by how Scotland is a very different country. We are in a very different place and further down the track in some ways, but encountering a whole other shed load of problems further down the track. So it's a tale of good news and bad. Ultimately, it's a tale of how it is not enough to have a good vision for social care, declared political support for human rights and independent living, acceptance of the importance of involving end users in policy development, and doing that increasingly well. Is not enough to have a manifesto commitment to remove social care charges, or multiple stakeholder advisory groups, some even chaired by ministers. And it isn't enough to have legislative action to create a national care service and remove the postcode lottery. So right now, despite all of the above happening, outcomes for people in Scotland who are using or needing social care support are no better, I would say, and possibly even worse than before, compounded by the impact of unmitigated COVID on demand and also supply and Brexit-related workforce shortages. It's a bit of a tale of going round in circles, of never managing to translate good visions and commitments into law successfully, and thence into practice, and thence into impact for the people who are using the service. There are weak links at every part of that chain, pulled apart by entrenched power struggles between national and local government, and with integration, healthcare and social care. And that's been compounded by the current attempts to legislate for a national care service. So we have a dysfunctional system, which at the front end is all about good quality conversations about personal outcomes, which then hit against financial realities. It's a vastly complex bureaucratic system. It has multiple players, little, if any, transparency. And that means that even if more money goes into it, it is unlikely to ever reach the front line. And that is what happened when Scottish Government put money, I think it was about £100 million, into social care when the pandemic struck. And it didn't seem to go, it just went into the black hole of local authority finance, didn't seem to translate through to the front line. But it isn't hopeless. And I'm interested that the previous speaker spoke about the social security as a comparison, because we also have a devolved social security system. And I've been very heavily involved in that. And I have seen in that context, innovative participatory approaches have translated and worked well and are now delivering improved services. Even though the idea that the Scottish Government has complete autonomy over devolved benefits, particularly over what is delivered rather than how, regrettably is fiction. So what we have at the moment is a national care service, which is kind of in gestation. A framework bill has been brought and basically paused because well, they weren't able to give a budget. It was, and 4 committees, I think it was, said it shouldn't go forward until they actually knew what it was going to cost, which seems fair enough. is kind of based on the social security legislation, but kind of weaker in every respect. Doesn't seem to have the same coherence, internal contradictions. There's no teeth, and as I said, no budget. It does nothing to reassure anybody and leaves everything wide open. The intention that is declared is that it's all going to be co-designed with people at the sharp end and carers. But what exactly are they co-designing? And how is that going to work? And ultimately is bogged down because of a major debacle between local authorities who see a huge amount of their power going into what looks like a centralized system. So I've got no time to talk about the detail of any of this, unfortunately, but I thought I'd just highlight a few things that may be of interest. Back in about 2017-18, I was the Chief Executive of Inclusion Scotland, the disabled people-led organisation. We were challenged by officials to come up with a model for involving end users in the development and co-design of social care. That led to the people-led policy panel, which was comprised of a wide variety of and diversity of people using social care and unpaid carers. And they were charged with co-producing the reform of social care along with other stakeholders. That was launched by the Cabinet Secretary in June 2019, and that got underway. Then, a bit later on, September 2020, suddenly there was an announcement of another review, the Derek Feely review, and it was like all that was happening that the people-led policy panel was doing disappeared. It was the rug was completely pulled. There wasn't anybody with lived experience on the group set up by the Feely review until we managed to get somebody on that from the people-led policy panel in the form of Jim Elder-Woodward, who you may know. And so where they are now, after a lot of consultation and toings and froings, is that they are now heavily involved in co-design in this paused process. It's due to come back to the Parliament in September. They're involved in sort of discussions around a proposed charter around an eligibility criteria. They are being influential, but the problem is this is still not translating into outcome and impact. It's kind of, getting a very well-designed rocket here, which we seem incapable of launching.
1 minute.
I very briefly want to just touch on something else, some recent research on self-directed support I was involved in with the University of Glasgow. So self-directed support is the main vehicle for delivering social care in Scotland. Basically, people can choose between a direct payment managed by somebody else, or local authority. And guess what? The research found that it was the local authority option that was basically being offered and widely taken up because others weren't through FOIs. There's a bit of a deadlock when it comes to advisory groups. So we interviewed people separately, different constituencies, and that we discovered everyone's passionate about human rights, but they have very different answers about what that means when it comes to operationalizing it. And each of the different players supported different options. Where does it leave us? There are models out there like the Independent Living Fund and the Norwegian model that could be of interest. But in my view, we need to get off the hamster wheel of defining visions, focusing overwhelmingly on policy-making processes and structures, re-researching things we already know the answer to. We need to concentrate on how to operationalize and translate and user involvement, not just at the front end, but right through to evaluation. So that's kind of the message. I hope that's food for thought. I'm very happy to expand on anything that I've said. My key summary is that Scotland has got many of the key starting points right, particularly regarding participatory approaches, but they have still a very long way to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. I must say one name did come to my mind when you were speaking of who might burst the bubble, and that was Guy Fawkes. But I'm not sure if we can go down that road. It's now our final speaker. I'm really pleased to say who is here. That's Ellen Clifford. And Ellen is a disabled activist and author who has worked within the disability sector for the past 25 years. She sits on the National Steering Group of Disabled People Against Cuts and is author of, she hasn't put this herself, the award-winning book, War on Disabled People. So please, over to you, Ellen. And we're offering people 5 minutes, and I'll give you a warning at 4.
Thanks, Peter. I think, like Sally, there's just so much that we can say on this. It is hard to fit in, but I'll try. So as my good friend and fellow activist, who I think is attending today, Rob Punton, said when he found out the title of this webinar, he said, we don't need to reform social care, we need to revolutionise it. I think that the issues with the current system run so deep that just tinkering around the edges is never going to be enough if our aim is, as disabled activists think it should be, to achieve full equality and inclusion for all disabled people so that we can enjoy the same life chances as everyone else. And I don't think anyone here today is unfamiliar with the long list of ways that the current system is failing us and why that needs to change. Chronic underinvestment and cuts have resulted in enormous budget shortfalls, and none of the additional money that's ever given is anywhere near enough to plug that. But I think that the problems are far more complex than simply a lack of funding, and that the fundamental framework that underpins the whole social care support system is one that limits disabled people to the status of second-class citizens. And it's something that Peter's written quite a lot about and spoken about, is how the post-World War II settlement left social care support largely untouched and on a different basis to the NHS, which was set up to be free at the point of need, whereas social care support left in the hands of local authorities to be provided on a resource-led basis as it is today. And I believe that therefore attempts to improve the experience of using social care can only ever have a limited impact so long as we have a system that's rooted in a fundamental power imbalance between professionals as guardians of those resources and service users whose needs threaten those resources. Investment in new approaches to social care support, I can think of over years that you know, some of us have been around, person-centered planning. I think there's asset-based approaches now, and they're only ever going to end up as empty rhetoric at best, or what happens at the moment is excuses to make cuts actually at worst, unless we have a radical overhauling of the entire social care support system. And that is a really big ask, and I think that we need to understand exactly what the barriers are facing us if we are going to be able to challenge that successfully. I think also that, as other speakers have said, that disabled people, our organisations, people who use social care services absolutely have to be involved in designing and co-producing what we would seek to replace the current system with. The value of co-production, I think there's no question that the value of it is underappreciated and too little used. But I think that another reason why we aren't often included around the table in conversations about changes needed to social care is because the solutions that we come up with based on our lived experience aren't actually welcome. They're not the things that people want to hear. Disabled people's organisations across England have actually worked collaboratively on our vision for the future of social care support, which we would extend to be independent living support across all areas of disabled people's lives, where we need non-medical intervention, we need support to live. A lot of collective work has gone into that. We're calling our vision a national independent living support service, but it's been very difficult to engage anyone on that. And I think that's partly because the way that we have local authority administered, have social care administered at the moment through local authorities, well, it's not in any of the interests of any parties who control local councils to get rid of that system. We're also talking about a national system, albeit delivered locally, but with a much reduced role of local authorities within that, and the ending of privatisation. So parties who are invested in economic models that include outsourcing and privatisation, again, what we've got to say is not something that they want to hear. And I think that that goes a long way to why we aren't, as I say, invited around the table, and all our work that we put into this is not engaged with. So I think that we do need to look to build public support and to put pressure on those politicians from outside. Unfortunately, there are barriers again to doing that. There is incredibly low level public awareness about disability more widely, and social care support specifically. It's quite a complex system. And I think unless people have experience of it themselves, they don't really understand or think about how it works. And that's really well evidenced by the fact that the majority of people without that experience seem to think that it's free, like the NHS is. And I think also there's this idea that it's something that affects older people, whereas actually half of expenditure is spent on working age people. So those are ideas that we need to try and challenge. We need to educate people more widely, but then the media isn't really interested in what we have to say, because it's not seen as a sexy topic, it's seen as an older people's topic. And I think generally the dominant narratives in society make people think that disability just isn't something that is relevant to them. My suggestions, for what they're worth, for how we work towards overcoming this, I think that we need to take lessons from what disabled activists achieved in terms of building support for our campaigning against welfare reform changes. Yes, we've still got a government that is pursuing the course as was outlined by the secret welfare rights worker, that absolutely is not in the interests of people who use services. But at the same time, we did succeed in puncturing the narrative of benefit scroungers. We did build support from opposition parties. We have managed to get U-turns in specific areas. And the way that we managed to do that at a time when the media, nowadays the media will cover this stuff, they didn't used to, was through direct actions. I believe that disabled activists, social care users need to start getting together again. COVID has really held us back. That's been a real problem, but I think we need to start getting active. We then have the ability to put our messages and our demands out there. Yes, civil disobedience is more commonplace than it once was, but I do believe that given the pity narratives that still dominate people's ideas of disabled people, actually what that does mean, on the other hand, is that visibly disabled people still have the power to attract media attention and public sympathy. I think that we need to try and utilise that and get coordinated and get out there again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. So I started off with Guy Fawkes, and I think you've actually sensibly perhaps brought us back to something rather similar. But I think what I hadn't realised was going to happen today was what a thorough and helpful critique, analysis of what the scale of the inadequacy of social care is, and even hearing about how there are perhaps sometimes different but parallel problems in Scotland. And the one thing I was interested to hear about, which is a subject for another day perhaps, is how some progress has been made in Scotland with regard to benefits, because there's been a complete lack of interest in the DWP in England, as far as we know, in any kind of participatory approach, despite the general rhetoric of governments. Now, we've got questions, and I want to try and do this in as fair a way as possible. The first one is a comment as much as a question. It was the first we got from Brian Fisher from the End Social Care Disgrace campaign, and I hope that Don won't mind coming back to this, but what Brian has said is, we've tried Don's suggestion of contacting famous people and have worked with you, and it hasn't worked so far too well. Any further suggestions, first of all, Don, on how that might work? And then maybe we could broaden it out with some of the other contributors about, I mean, I know that Ellen's already been talking about it, about how we actually make that change. So could we start with you, Don?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, cold contacting, you can try it, but I'm not sure it works that well. It's all about networks. I mean, there's that guy, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He said your net worth is your network. And that's essentially what it is. It's essentially, it's quite a slow way to do it, but once you get there, you get there. But you've got to tap your networks to find out where those contacts are. And then once you've got that contact, you can build on those contacts. I mean, say cold contacting, no one really goes for that, but it's all about networks, really. I mean,
I have to say, I think Marcus Rashford is an extraordinary person, and I've read one of his book for youngsters, and I just thought that what he didn't do was to fall into the usual traps that famous people fall into. Here's a man who's understanding and educated and has empathy, and he wasn't just saying about how you can improve your life. He was emphasizing issues around working with other people together to make.
I mean, we've seen these issues, as Ellen said, social care is not a sexy issue, but then they've been highlighted by certain famous people. Look at Chris Sutton, the ex-footballer. He did a program about his father who got dementia, and Katie Price, her son as well. Again, these issues only get raised or highlighted by the media and the papers when there's someone famous there, and somehow you've got to break through that sort of low regard of them, really.
Thanks, Don. And could I just go over, if you don't mind, Richard? I mean, you've now written a book which is really offering a way forward. But how do we break the logjam, Richard? What's going to trigger off, especially in these very difficult ideological as well as practical political times, that massive change which all of you in one way or another have set out in detail?
Well, I think there's no shortcuts or easy answers to this, Peter, would be my first response. And that my point about there's been too much short-term policy making, not thinking ahead and planning ahead and thinking that we can make changes very quickly. But I take heart and I take hope from what we were able to do as a country in 1948, where the economy was trashed. We were recovering from a deep, bitter world war, yet we managed to create a universal healthcare system. And to this very day, although people are unhappy with the performance of the NHS, there is still a massive public support today for a universal tax-funded, free at the point of use healthcare. And so I think we've got to get the public to that point of understanding that this is now a universal need. It's important not only to the economy, but to our own well-being and quality of lives and peace of mind. And I think until we do that, the politicians, the government of the day will just continue to see it as some residual minority issue that's not really that important and doesn't carry much clout. We've got to get the public to see this as something that they think is really, really important. And that's going to take time. It's going to take a big and massive sustained series of conversations with the public that I think we could start locally, actually, and try and build up some of that pressure for change from the bottom up.
Could I just ask the secret welfare rights worker, because a premise of what government has seemed to do in relation to benefits is to trade on its belief, certainly, that the public has a very low opinion of people on welfare benefits. What do you think, from your experience of the public, as it were, in relation to welfare benefits policy, are ways in which we could helpfully take forward what Richard's been talking about?
Well, I thought I really do agree with Richard. I think that I did hear something on the radio yesterday that millennials hate the Tories. And so that gave me some hope that you could perhaps take things forward with younger people. But I do think you've got to have absolute radical rethink. I think Ellen said about you don't need to reform social care, you need to revolutionise it. And I think the same is absolutely true of the benefit system, which of course is connected to social care. And I think that generally people have absolutely no understanding of it, no understanding of social care, haven't a clue how anything works, don't know who funds what, absolutely divorced from it unless they're unfortunate enough to need it from a very early age. It doesn't occur to them that they'll ever have any impairments, disabilities, that they'll need to claim benefits. The organisation I work with works with people of 50 and over, and people are unbelievably shocked when they discover that they're going to need a universal credit or personal independence payment. They talk about how awful the council are not to give it to them, because they actually think the local authority runs the benefit system. They have no idea, people have no idea who does what. And it seems to me that when you have a situation like that, when people don't even know how anything works, how can they relate to it? How can they understand it? How can they be involved in changing it? It is very much a them and us situation. Now, I'm not saying it would help, it would necessarily help, but why don't schools ever teach anything about the benefit system? Why don't they ever have anything about social care or help at home, or how the system works and what benefits you might claim? So people have no understanding at all. And it seems to me that if you don't address that, it's going to be really hard to change anything, because people just don't relate to it. If I ask people, when they say to me, oh, I've never claimed benefits, I've worked all my life, that's code for, I think there are loads of benefits scroungers out there, and I don't want you to think I'm one of them. And I say to them, what level of benefit fraud do you think there is? They'll say things like, oh, 50%, and then their husband, wife, partner will say, oh, don't be silly, it's probably only 25%. They have no idea. They have swallowed it hook, line and sinker, that there's them and us, and the ones out there are committing fraud, and they don't really need the benefits and they don't really need the services. And I think those issues have to be tackled. We have to somehow engage people and help people understand how things work. Some people even think that the organisation I work for, which is a charity, that I will decide if they can get the benefit, or I will decide if they can get their blue badge.
Thanks for that. I want to turn now to a comment and question from Mia Mantry. And she's recently published an article and talked about her own difficult and excluding experience in her life, and people seeing her as someone with things wrong with her, saying, as a result, my life has been very restricted and I've lost a lot of life's opportunities. As an abuse victim, I've learned self-advocacy can be dangerous, but a lot of people have told me I just need to be more confident in asserting my rights, and many people just signpost me. What she's asking is, how can we make it so that people who need to be able to speak for themselves, who want to be able to speak for themselves, have more support through advocacy and self-advocacy in our present circumstances for that really to be possible? And could I start off by asking Ellen, and then maybe if Sally would come in.
Thanks, Peter, and hi, Mia. I think it is a very difficult question nowadays, because so many of the networks, the support networks, self-advocacy, peer support networks that once existed are no longer there due to cuts to funding. I think that a lot of disabled people's organisations have been in the situation for the last decade that we never experienced before that, when people are coming to us in great distress and there's literally nowhere to signpost people to. In my experience, social media has stepped into that gap, which is a brilliant thing, but unfortunately that obviously excludes a lot of people. By attending today, Mia, and obviously we've worked together in the past, which has been great, that is something that you are able to access, and I would encourage getting involved in forums that have set up. I know that there have been mutual aid support groups that set up during COVID that are still going now to continue supporting people with issues from the cost of living, for example. I think there are issues with that. I think that that people shouldn't have to volunteer in their free time to prop up the issues that are left by government and the state retreating from supporting people. I think also it's very hit and miss and patchy, but I think that we're at a stage now that, you know, people just we have to look after ourselves with whatever is out there. So I can't speak to what's available in your local area or the particular issues, but I do believe that peer support is playing a very important role now in keeping people going. Thanks.
Thanks, Ellen. And Sally, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I agree with a lot of what Ellen has said. I think the way I would come at it is from my experience of COVID. I'm at high clinical risk. I've always had a visible impairment in the form of being a wheelchair user and experienced discrimination on that front. I now have acquired an invisible impairment in the form of risk. So people on the one hand don't believe I can do things and do believe and so they don't believe that I can do anything because I look like a poor wee wheelchair user. And conversely, they expect me to be able to go places and do things. I can't, because they can't see my risk and they don't believe that either. So it's been an incredibly distressing period, and it still is. The level of denial and disinformation is off the charts. So I'm sorry, I agree with everything everyone has said about we need to educate people, we need to kind of inform people. They don't get it. Of course they don't. No, they don't. They're not going to get it because there's active campaigns of misinformation and disinformation. And people, you know, with a vested interest, mostly mainstream media, who have got no interest in actually educating people. So they do get it and they do understand it. And the political system, frankly, particularly with regard to the UK government, that I kind of give up on it. You know, I don't see I don't even see it anymore as being democracy. That's how bad I think it is. What I would say is that what I have seen in the last 3 years is, from a blank sheet of paper, a whole new third sector sprout into being, grassroots up. It has been extraordinary. And in terms of peer support and everybody feeling so literally isolated, it's about new ways of forming communities. I have a community on social media, on Twitter. I have great friends I interact with. I've never met them. I don't even know what their names are. You know, one of them, as far as I know, is a crocheted penguin. You know, that is literally, but interact on a regular basis. And it kind of translates into real life sometimes too, as well. There's a new thing called COVID meetups. It's how we use online media. This is set up by the World Health Network. And there's kind of little groups of people, anyone who's kind of wants to use COVID cautious, across the world, not just in the UK. And each little group set up. So I'm a member of the Scotland COVID meetups. There's a little bunch of us. It's only been going on a few months. We meet up, all of us masked, in the local park or whatever, you know, get a lot of funny looks, but we kind of do that, and we're all COVID cautious, and it works. And it gives us, this is what peer support is about, using WhatsApp to keep in touch and so on.
Can I stop you there? Sorry, so we can just get some more in. I noticed that Richard's got his hand up, but I wanted to come to you, Richard, for another question. I want to get as many possible questions in we can. Yeah. We've got so little time, and I think this is such a helpful discussion. Do panelists agree, from Mark Harrison, that we need a national independent living support service based on Article 19 of UN CRPD? I think our panelists will be able to explain on that if need be. Free at the point of need, funded by direct progressive taxation, and delivered by disabled people's organisations and not-for-profit organisations. Would you come in on that one, Richard? And then perhaps I could ask Don similarly.
Yeah, that was the point I was going to make, actually, Peter, because one of the ideas I've put forward in my book was the idea of everywhere having a local advice centre that was independently funded and resourced, that could offer a wide range of support to individuals, that could include advocacy, it could include brokerage, it could include even helping to provide legal advice and support to challenge public body, the decisions of public bodies. Because without that, we're just talking the talk about self-directed support and individual rights, but we're not giving people the means to enforce them and giving them the teeth to really sort of get some traction here. So I would support that, and obviously it has to be free at the point of use. It has to be a part of that universal infrastructure.
Thanks, Don. Sorry, Richard and Don, now over to you.
Yeah, I agree. We do need a national independent living service. And I feel, I mean, I'm not a fan of co-production because, as Ellen said, they're happy to welcome you as long as you say what they want to hear. At the point where and I've been in meetings where I've told them what they don't want to hear, then after that, the consultation ends. Unless you're in charge of the money, and you have the power to sort of do what's best for the money, it's pointless, really. So co-production is just greenwash. I do feel that every local authority ought to have a user-led organisation which is there to run the local authority adult social care service, but also they're there to provide other things such as advocacy. It's all very well giving people rights, but if they don't know their rights, that doesn't help. And also, even when they know their rights, often the people are too scared to enforce those rights. You need local user-led organisations to run adult social care and to provide advice. And there are certain pockets around England where bits of it work well, in Derby, and you see Spectrum CIL in Southampton, but generally people just left without help. And local authorities, as Ellen said, they're led by resource, and they only fund enough care that the resources let them fund.
Thank you. And in fact, you were kind of like picking up incidentally on points that we've already heard about from people and echoing them. Now, I want to turn to John Pring's question, which maybe I'll ask Ellen to respond to. And John Pring, as people may know, is the editor of the Disability News Service, a much valued service. How do the panelists think we can persuade political parties? I'm thinking particularly of Labour here, as they are likely to form the next government, to back the idea of ending social care charges, and how important do they think this is? Over to you, Ellen.
Thanks for that. I think it is. It has become a lot more difficult, I'd say, recently with the Labour Party on engaging with them as disabled campaigners about the things that we want to talk to them about. And there is the difficulty that I mentioned before about the fact that I think in drawing attention to what's happening now and why we need change is not in the interests of Labour councils, Labour-run councils. A future government, though, I suppose, would hopefully change things to the extent that councils would not feel that they were lacking so much in terms of funding that they needed to charge for services. I'm not confident in terms of Labour's economic policy that they're going to feel comfortable doing that. So it goes back to what I said before. I think we have to put pressure on from outside. I remember a similar kind of Labour Party in the run-up to the 2015 general election. They would not come out against the work capability assessment, which they are now very much against. And how we achieved that was by building allies and putting widespread support on them so that they felt that they had no choice but to change. I think what we'll see from the current Labour Party is that they're not going to adopt policies until we've made space for them to do that by changing public opinion. And like we've all talked about, that is not a quick thing to do, but I think that that's where the focus of our efforts has to be.
Thanks, Ellen. Is anybody else like to add to that?
Yeah, I feel Labour are not interested in making social care free because they feel that they've won the race already. I think if they're put in a position where they feel that they're going to lose a lot of votes, then they might want to change their mind. And so maybe again a campaign basically saying, don't vote for Labour, because Labour just said time and again, they're the party of the working people, and beyond that they don't really care because they feel that's enough votes to win an election. So I think you need to sort of show them that people are not going to vote for them unless they do certain things, and maybe they change their mind.
Thanks. I guess it's time for us to begin to wind up. It's now 15 minutes from our end, and we've got hopefully going to have a chance to hear from all of you a roundup comment. Could I start perhaps with the secret welfare rights work, and especially how it seems to you, having been part of today when most of the people are talking primarily from a point of view of the issues of social care, linking that with your own experience, just for a minute, each of us.
So I think I agree completely that somehow some hope has to lie with the Labour Party, because at the moment we basically have a two-party system, and I'm desperately hoping that the Labour Party will win the next election. Having said that, I don't have a great deal of faith in it. I joined the Labour Party at a certain other critical moment in support of a certain other person who is now a non-person in the Labour Party. But I think somehow we do have to, I think Don's right, I agree that, and Ellen, that we somehow have to convince them that it will be popular if changes are made, and then they will have the guts to go forward, because they are gutless and they won't want to go forward unless they think it's going to be okay for them. I don't have brilliant ideas of how we change people's minds, but I think we do somehow have to engage people in understanding that we are all at risk at some time or other of things not being okay for us in whatever way. Even incredibly rich people can find it incredibly difficult to access social care. And I know of examples of people who can pay for it, but they still can't access it because the local private services can't get workers. So even your money doesn't always make you safe. So somehow we have to engage people and encourage people to see that these are issues that affect all of us, and we all might need social care and we all might need benefits, and nobody is safe from that. And it's not about stigmatizing people, but engaging people to understand that it has to be an inclusive system, that is accountable, and that we all have some stake in it. I haven't got brilliant ideas about that. I like Don's idea. I can't think at the moment of any famous person who's going to take up welfare rights, especially, sadly. But I think that is the only way forward that there have to be policy changes from the top, and somehow from the bottom we have to put pressure on people, I'd say specifically on the Labour Party at the moment, and we have to work out how to do that, and we have to make it that, gutless though they are, they realise, yes, we've got to make change.
Thank you. I'm going to ask everyone to have their summing up comments, but please, could you keep it to about a minute? Thank you. Over to you, Sally.
Yeah, I don't think anyone said anything I disagree with throughout the entire session. And all I would say is that working in an environment where SNP does want to remove social care charges. It's in its manifesto. It does want to listen to what people have got to say. It does it all the time. It goes to great efforts. It does listen. It does, and it incorporates it into policy and legislation. But it doesn't deliver it. So if I knew the answer of how to reform social care, believe you me, I would have told you a long time ago, and everybody else. We need to understand, I think, that the whole kind of power dynamic has shifted. Fundamentally, some of the old ways of doing things no longer work, and they never did brilliantly. And I do think it's about a grassroots movement. I have seen not just the impact of peer support, but the generation of expertise and power in the grassroots movements related to COVID. And that's, I think, is going to be the way forward. I no longer think in the way that I've worked all my career, which is about trying to influence governments. I don't think that's going to work because the blocks are too big there, and it's dysfunctional in the current financial climate and the way the financial markets work. The problem is wealth and wealth accumulation fundamentally. We are all focused on the symptoms, not the actual cause. And until we can get our heads around that big picture stuff, we're dealing with the consequences. And that's the big shift. It's a massive shift. As Ellen said, it isn't reform, it is revolution. Yeah, it's pretty big. But we have to, I think, starting locally is going to be the way to do it on this occasion.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that, Sally. Could I ask Richard next?
Sure, thanks, Peter. I think whoever forms the next government faces an unenviable range of dilemmas and challenges across the whole public realm, actually. And even within social care, I mean, just paying care workers a decent wage and conditions of service is going to cost billions. Restoring some of the cuts to eligibility will have a price tag. Making care free at the point of need will cost money as well. So I think there are, in the short term particularly, there are going to be choices and difficult trade-offs between these things for whoever forms the government. For me, that cements the argument for taking a long-term approach, having a proper long-term plan for this, and especially securing the public support for that kind of investment that will make that politically possible for whoever forms the next government.
Thank you. And Ellen?
Yeah, I think I'd echo a lot of what Sally's saying about the importance of the grassroots. And it's so difficult when we're all navigating day-to-day life, which is becoming harder and harder for everyone, not just disabled people, to try and build in extra things. But I will say that in my experience of activism, there's a huge amount of peer support that's built into that, and it can give you a real boost and be important for your well-being, as well as working towards trying to affect social change. I think it's so important to work collaboratively, to join up our visions, because I think there are lots of different groups of people working on things, and we've come to the similar conclusions about the solutions, but because we don't get much publicity or support for those, it means that we never actually hear about each other. So forums like this are really important to do that. I just wanted quickly to mention the Experts by Experience Commission on Social Security, funded by Trust for London, that's been coming up with a claimant-led project, coming up with solutions for a better social security system. And that acknowledges in turn the importance of also needing a national independent living support service, because the two have an interface. I think someone has put in the chat about where to join groups. I'd recommend Disabled People Against Cuts, of course, and anyone interested in National Independent Living Support Service, there is the Reclaiming Our Futures Alliance, and their website's got more information. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Dom, please.
Yeah, and let's be quite clear, there's plenty of money out there to fund adult social care. There's a very good Labour peer, Prem Sicker, who's looked at various little tax things that are out there that aimed at rich people. So there's plenty of money to actually fund social care. And I think basically Labour ought to be brave and just tax those richer people. And I think in terms of change, maybe what we ought to do is stand 650 independent candidates in every constituency in the local general election, and just have an adult social care candidate. You'll get plenty of airtime from the hustings, and you'll make the issue very, very public. And I think also that might be a very good way to put pressure on Labour, and Labour will see that actually, because in some marginal seats that Labour have to win, they will lose votes based on adult social care independent candidates. So, encourage all your friends to be an independent candidate in general election.
Thank you, Dom. And very quickly, just to say what I think, I am amazed actually how much I think I've learned from today, because this can sometimes seem like a discussion that goes round and round and round the same old houses, and I don't think it has done that. I think we have talked in a more thoughtful way than our conventional leaders would believe that we do and can. And I think there's three issues for me. I really absolutely fundamentally agree with what both Sally and Ellen have articulated, the importance of grassroots engagement. And of course, there are counters to it. People see it as people already worn out. But I think when you start to do it, you realize, like Ellen said, it can actually be a lifter rather than a burden. And it's great to hear as we've heard in my own organisation, Shaping Our Lives, about the ways in which, although COVID has so damaged some people and policy has so excluded some people, in other ways, COVID has been a launch pad for other things and good things, and us talking to each other. I think that the issue of on the ground, people engaging with each other is what's absolutely critical here. It's that or we've got nowhere to go. I think it is about change within us, all of us, rather than expecting change from our leaders. I do think that also picks up on what Ellen touched on, which is we need to build alliances with other issues as well. Instead of being bottom of the pile of issues, as sometimes disabled people are presented as, we are an equal participant who've got a right on equal terms to form equal alliances, and we need to be doing that. But the biggest thing for me, and that people don't talk enough about, and I think we should talk about, is that who we are as a society. And I think that the secret welfare rights workers summed it up. The government, in my opinion, cannot actually believe there's all these disabled people. It thinks they must be a fraud, but it's been telling us, it's researchers for yonks, that there are going to be more older people and more disabled people, and that's the evidence. And the point's going to be reached in a society like ours, let alone what's going on in the global south and the damage done to it by the global north, where, in my opinion, disabled and older people will outnumber the rest of the population, and coming up to that's going to be the critical changer. But I think we're looking more specifically at ways forward, and I think we've got them. I hope that the Labour hasn't worked out our subtle tactics for trying to influence it by watching this, but I sadly doubt that they have. And we will keep on applying pressure. I'm going to hand over now. I want first, though, to thank all the questions we got and comments. Sorry we couldn't deal with all of them. Thanks enormously to every member of the panel. And hand over quickly now to Catherine for her closing bits of business. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was absolutely fascinating discussion. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us today at this Policy Press webinar, and to our speakers, Dawn, Richard, Secret Welfare Rights Worker, Sally, Ellen, and our excellent chair, Peter.
Oh.
Details of how to order the books, a 50% discount, are available in the chat, and they'll also be sent to you after the event, along with a recording, which you're welcome to share with anybody who wasn't able to join us today. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone.
Thanks, everyone. And that's a genuine thanks to all the panel. Thank you. And I think this was really creative. I hope it's felt reasonably, because it can feel like that film, what was it, when Groundhog Day, when you go over and over it, and we seem to have a government that takes us back to even before. I mean, do people not remember what one of the potential achievements of New Labour was that strategy, which would have been part of it, a local user-controlled disabled people's organisation, which people like Jenny Morris struggled to make happen, and then of course died a death. And it's awful that that's the case. So can I just say an initial thank you very much to everyone, and I hope that we'll all be meeting again, perhaps a bit more positively and further up the road. Thank you. Oh, and thanks to Catherine, and also not forgetting thanks to Abby, who's been helping us in the background. Yes. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.